is everyone ready? 7 o'clock in Gardner, Kansas. Call the meeting to order. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. We've got a fairly light agenda tonight. Get started on Christmas and holidays and all that fun stuff. Steve, you already started, it looks like.
I'm in a festive mood, man.
All right. Already started the eggnog, right?
No,
Okay.
I am not on this sauce. That's
Tonight.
later.
Okay. We have no presentations, no public hearings, so we'll go right into public comments. And at this time, members of the public are welcome to use this time to make comments about city matters or items on the agenda that are not part of a public hearing. If you wish to come forward, please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. There is a clock to your left. No profanity, no personal attacks. And with that being said, please state your name and address for the record, and the podium is now open.
My name is Mozella Marie Neighbor. I reside and have been residing for a while at 17490 Chestnut Street. I understand precisely that I live in Gardner, Kansas. And as I stand before it and look at the makeup of the board of my city council, I know where I'm at. I have no idea why within the last 4 to 6 months that I have been wanting to get bids on my home, that I've had so much trouble that I've never ever had. But I'm gonna protect what is mine to the best of my ability, whether it means coming here, going to the state, or even going to Washington, D.C. I'm gonna protect what's mine. And when I was here the last time, and I was on my way home, I can see in front of me, but I forgot. People attack you at night when you don't know who they are and when you can't see them. That kind of missed me for just a second. As I was going home, my neighbor, who I complained to code enforcement about, was trailing behind me. And I kept wondering who that was on my bumper. My car is very, very distinctive, and it's even more distinctive at night. As I turned into my yard, she turned in with me. She almost hit my car. This was very much upsetting to me. I went in the house, didn't think about it a lot. The next morning, I made a few phone calls and I was told it's time to start a paper trail. It's no reason for anybody to have been following you. It's no reason for her to have turned when you turned, going into your driveway. This is why it's not good for people to report, code enforcement officers to report who has complained against them. I'm here to go on record. I'm not moving. But this will stop and this will change. And I hope it's with your help. And I pray that it's not without it.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Further public comments? All right. We'll move to consent agenda. Is there an item on the consent agenda? Council like to move?
Let's remove item number 3.
Do I have a motion for consent agenda items 1, 2, 4, and 5?
Second.
Motion Deaton, second Baldwin. We approve consent agenda items 1, 2, 4, and 5. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain? Items 1, 2, 4, and 5 pass. Consent agenda item number 3, consider authorizing the approval of an invoice from Cohorst Enterprises, Inc. for repairs at the Gardner Aquatic Center.
Yeah, I just, this one kind of stuck out to me. I read through the council action form, and it was talking about leak repairs that, for leaks that had been discovered, I guess, during the season. After the season, after the shutdown of the pool, there was a request to get those leaks repaired. This isn't anything like what we had before, right? This is just basically wear and tear, and some subsidence is not.
Yeah, these were smaller ones that we knew about, that we were able to isolate. The break that we had last year was much more significant.
Yes, it was, but we're not looking at anything that's going to be. I mean, right now the current state of the pool is such that we're not seeing anything like that happening down the horizon.
Yes, hopefully not.
Okay.
We'll know next spring once we fire up the filters and everything. So, but yeah, this is something that we could do at the end of the season that we knew that we had to fix.
Do we need to just assume that we're going to have this kind of maintenance on a yearly basis and maybe plan for that in our budget?
We actually have city administrator and our finance director. We've built in funding for that.
Okay.
In the general fund.
Good. I know we still have to authorize the expenditure, but I think that it'd be wise to start if we haven't already. So. Okay, that's all I had.
Any further comment? Questions? Do I have a motion for consent agenda item number 3?
So moved.
Second.
Motion Shute, second Deaton. We approve consent agenda item number 3. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstained? Consent agenda item number 3 passes. Nothing on planning and zoning consent. Moving to committee recommendations. Consider adopting an ordinance approving amendments to Title 17 Land Development Code, food and beverage, mobile use, and mobile grouping. Mr. Nopick.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Before you tonight is a series of amendments for Title 17 having to do with mobile food vendors and mobile food groupings in the city of Gardner. We currently do have an ordinance, but I'll take you back through this year a little bit. At the beginning of this year, we had some inquiry about the possibility of doing a mobile food vendor court on a parcel of property. And then we also had several new food vendors move into the community and tie directly to utilities like electric and sewer. So it started prompting some inquiries about our process and also our code requirements, mainly having to do how do we differentiate between something that's truly mobile and temporary at a site versus something that is permanent or semi-permanent at a site. So with that in mind, staff started working on a series of draft amendments, and we had 6 primary goals. One was to clarify the existing food and beverage mobile use definition, so there's a couple definitional changes as part of this. And then also we added a definition for food and beverage mobile grouping. We used mobile grouping because that was some terminology that was already in the code instead of renaming things as food courts and things like that. So we just stuck with the terminology that was there. In both those cases, then we made differentiations between what we would consider the temporary or mobile nature of the vendors or the group or the court, and then what was permanent or semi-permanent. There were really 3 primary factors that go into that differentiation. One is it attached to the ground or not? So if it's attached to the ground, it's pretty easy to say that's a permanent situation or potentially a semi-permanent situation. Similar, and I'm going to use this example, similar to maybe what you would consider a manufactured home. How is it tied to the ground? The wheels come off, the axles, and now it's permanently attached or it's part of that site. The second one was attaching to the utilities. Our code currently allows for some attachments, and I'm going to use the word indirect attachments, where if there's a principal structure on the site, they can run an extension cord and plug into the principal structure, and that property owner has agreed to either pay the utilities or is getting some kind of reimbursement for that utility use. There are times that's used when we have special events, for instance, or even under scenarios where you have an individual vendor who's there, but it's conveniently located to an electrical outlet, and they'll do that instead of running their generators. The other option, and this happened in one particular case where an electrical meter was put in specifically for the mobile use. That's what I'm going to call a direct connection to the utility at that point, and that is where we start saying that that's a permanent or a semi-permanent use When you start tapping a water line to put a water meter in, or tapping a sewer line for sewer usage, or tying directly into an electrical system through a meter, a direct connection to the meter, that's where we're defining that as a semi-permanent or permanent use of the property versus running that extension cord into somebody's building that's there. So we've made those two distinctions. The third one then, that's another primary distinction, is whether that vehicle is moving off-site when it's not in use. So if we're permanently stationing I'm not gonna call it structure, the vehicle, if you will, there, and it's staying there in the off hours, so it's not offering anything, they're storing it essentially between business hours, then we felt it was important to start saying that's a semi-permanent or permanent use of the property versus the vendor who comes in, is open from 4 in the evening till 9 at night, and they drive off at the end of those hours and they store it somewhere else. So those are the three primary differentiators that we were looking at between temporary and mobile and permanent and semi-permanent use of the property. We then tried to clarify some of the applicable standards to each use, and more importantly, what we said is if we're going to become a permanent or a semi-permanent type use, we're going to take you away from that temporary use permit process and put you into a conditional use permit process. So essentially that allows us then, when people want to tie directly to utilities or they want to station their vehicle there on a 24-hour basis, whether they're open or closed, they can do that through the conditional use permit, but it's subject to further review by the Planning Commission and then by you as a council for approval of that permit. We felt that was important because we've had a couple situations now, particularly I'm going to point to the property to the west where we had somebody move into a vacant lot and it's surrounded by residential use. We anticipate that when that gets busy, we will probably see some phone calls and complaints. We do know that at times the traffic spilled out onto Main Street when they were busy, and we want them to be successful, we want them to be busy, but we also need to consider what's the context in which these places are operating. So when we started talking about the permanent and semi-permanent use of property for these types of uses, one of the things that staff leaned on was looking at our definition of our typical food and beverage use, which is typical to a bricks and mortar restaurant. We felt that it wasn't appropriate to just require those same requirements, but we felt it was appropriate to go ahead and require them to go through the additional review process so we can look at the site context, we can look at what's available, and we can sit down with that and make an assessment as to whether we should allow that to happen in the way that they're being proposed to us. So that's what gets us into that view. The temporary use permit was really there to recognize, under the old definitions, was really there to recognize that these things would be mobile. They would be self-contained in handling their gray water and handling their water, and their electricity would either come from a generator or an extension cord plugged into a building at that site. As we're getting these different kinds of situations coming to us, we felt that the code was inadequate in dealing with those new situations. Then finally, we wanted to recognize that there are applicable licenses and certifications and permits and registration requirements outside of the city. We learned about the requirement that this fire district has. There's supposed to be a permit that's given to them to make sure they've passed a fire inspection in addition to their food and health inspections. That is actually a metro program that the fire district has joined. So if the vendor is based in Kansas City, Missouri, or even Overland Park, if they've had their fire inspection, it's recognized by a number of fire agencies, and they'll have a sticker on their vehicle. They turn in that sticker with the number to us as part of the review process. We send it off to Brad Ralston over at the fire district, and he verifies that yes, they're up to snuff with all their inspections. So that means they don't have to get that kind of permit from every jurisdiction they operate in. So we were unaware of that program, so we wanted to make sure that we at least called out that there were these other license and certifications and registrations that would be required as part of the process. From that, we went to the Planning Commission with our amendments, and actually we first gave them our draft amendments in August at their meeting just to kind of look at. Usually the steps that I take is I provide a draft without any public comment or formal public hearing. I want them to get oriented with the language. We came back the next meeting, we discussed that, and then we set a public hearing for that. So on November 28th, the Planning Commission did hold a public hearing on this item. We did get one letter. It was from the Chamber of Commerce that came in before the meeting. And what we had done in the previous amendments is we had removed the ability to go ahead and tie electrical to a principal structure through the extension cord under a temporary situation. We had preferred that they went to the generator. The Chamber of Commerce letter was asking about that, and we decided to put that piece back into the code. It never left, but we took it back into our draft to allow that to happen just like it does today. The second item we had is we had an individual who has some property near the downtown area that had an interest in the food courts and had concerns about the way we were differentiating the temporary versus the semi-permanent, permanent kind of definitions. And based on that, there was a conversation that came through the Planning Commission that we decided to go ahead and move this forward, or the Planning Commission decided to move this forward with the changes addressing the chambers and give staff an opportunity to research the item, and if we needed to come back, we could come back and make adjustments. I did have some discussions and communications in-house regarding the issue that came up, which had to do with that differentiation. And what this allows us to do by calling this semi-permanent permanent really just means that we're going through the conditional use permit process, which at the end of the day means that we'll be looking at utility connections on a site-by-site or case-by-case basis, which is important throughout this whole process. The conditional use permit process is really intended to look at that site context and the existing conditions, and we can then also look at the business or operations plan for that use on that property, and we can determine if further conditions are needed. So utilities may be allowed there, they may not be allowed, or they may be allowed with certain conditions and performance standards. But that would be a case-by-case basis, again, that goes through the Planning Commission and then to you as a city council to determine if they're adequate or if they need to be adjusted at that point in time. From that public hearing process, then the Planning Commission did make a recommendation that the City Council approve the proposed amendments as outlined in your attached materials in the draft that's before you tonight. So with that, I will stop and stand for any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Excuse me. Do we have any public comment for committee recommendation number 1?
I have a question. Can I ask a
Yes,
question?
please come forward to the podium.
I will follow procedure and identify myself again. Mozella Marie Mavon, 17490 Jessica Street, Gardner, Kansas. My question is, I have visited several of these trucks in town, several of them. Some of them have very, very good food. My concern is how we're monitoring the health codes and the health regulations. How will they be inspected? Very few trucks did I notice from passing food out to customers kept the same gloves on. I have a problem with that. Because if you're getting money from a customer and you're not changing your gloves, and then you're taking my order and you're taking my money, the point I'm making is, we must have regulation. COVID is spreading. I'm elderly. I want to eat good, but I want to be safe. And I love these trucks, but we need to govern what's going on. And I haven't seen any with water. No water, no site that's dispensing water. He said, well, we filled up jugs. What happens when you get a lot of customers and those jugs run out? That's my concern. Thank you much.
Dave, can you address the question?
So just like the fire district situation, we rely on the county health department and the regulations that have to do with food preparation and things like that. So they are subject to a health inspection, just like any restaurant would be or any food service would be. But it's really left to the county then to enforce that. If we receive complaints about those kinds of things, we can go ahead and call the county to do that. All I can say is once it's there, it's up to them to enforce those situations on the health side. When it comes to water provision and other types of food preparation provision, The truck is intended to be mobile for a reason, and they are intended to bring in their own water, bring in their own supplies as part of that food preparation element. The part of this that gets intriguing is if they get busy and they run out, they're done. They're done for the day sometimes, and that's it. So they only will carry so much supply for whatever they're doing. So if it's very busy, again, it's almost like operating their regular hours. They might say, I'm there from 4 to 9, or until things run out, or I can't provide the service anymore. So that's generally what happens.
Thank you. Council, questions, comments?
My only concern was about grandfathering. So obviously we have certain trucks in certain locations now, and at that conditional use that you're talking about in terms of looking at the contextual makeup of that particular establishment vis-a-vis the stuff that's around it, whether it's zoning or other classifications. Obviously, there's one in particular that I'm thinking of here, but what would we do in those situations if we ever receive complaints?
So what's going to happen here, our temporary use permits are due annually. So no matter who's been here previously, every year they come in currently for a temporary use permit. In a situation where we have determined through the application process, because they'll make their new applications here at the beginning of this year, when they make those applications, if we determine from review of the application that it needs to go to a conditional use permit versus a temporary use, we're going to extend the current temporary use to allow that process to unfold.
Okay.
So that's kind of how we're handling it. We don't have what I'd call a grandfather provision for this kind of adjustment.
Okay.
But basically what we're going to do administratively is say, as long as you're coming in a timely way to renew it, if we get that determination made, and we put you through that process, because that will take basically a 2-month time frame, a little less than that, 6 weeks, because it's got to go through a public hearing just like anything else and a notice for the surrounding property owners. So if we do that, we're going to see the other permit extended and valid until we get through the process. Sure. Now the other part of it is we anticipate we're already starting to revise our application form so we can get some of those questions answered up front, so that we know what's going on with the business to understand which of the two processes best fits conditional use or temporary use permit.
I mean, obviously, the reason why they're using mobile units is because of the fact that either they're doing a test market or they're trying to save money. Ultimately, we would love to have those folks, stay in town, obviously, and be successful. But we also want to make sure that it's
and sometimes the most viable use of the property is one of these trucks.
Correct.
Again, but we want it to be looked at in its context. A use that keeps its vehicle there 24/7 but is in a commercial context may be much more acceptable than in a residential context. And so that's why we got to look at some of these individual properties differently that are vacant. It also gives us an opportunity that if there are site improvements that need to be made, that we would hold bricks and mortar users to. There are some of those that we might say, okay, we need to bring this site into closer compliance somehow, or we've got to look at some of these other issues so that we're just not simply approving what I'd call an interim use of the property that all of a sudden becomes permanent. So.
correct. All right, thanks, Dave.
I do have a quick, any comment from any of the vendors that are out there?
Yeah, so what we did ahead of time, before this was considered for a public hearing, we sent the draft amendments out to all the temporary use permit holders that we had in the community. We sent an email with all the attachments. We did get a couple questions back through that process, and we did have a couple vendors who were at the Planning Commission meeting, but they did not speak. Just one property owner spoke at the meeting itself. So we didn't have a lot of comments. Now, since the Planning Commission meeting, we've had at least one vendor who's come in and has begun to ask questions about, okay, what happens to me next here? And basically what we've told that individual is that if this passes tonight, once it's published and we're ready to roll, we're going to be sending out a follow-up to all of the temporary use permit holders and start talking to them individually about what they need to do next and how we go about this process. So we're hoping that means that we're in pretty good shape with everything that's here. There'll probably be some unique situations that we haven't anticipated. It's kind of like what we've experienced over the last year. Nobody really anticipated somebody tapping into a sewer line. It was intended to be a mobile use, not something where we were tying into a utility. So I think we may find that we have some of those situations, and we'll work with those folks as best we can.
Dave, I understand with the conditional use permit, obviously it's conditional and it's highly subjective, right? But are we working towards at least a small set of objective criteria, and then obviously each site is unique, but something that will help them already know before somebody even comes into town?
Yeah. So there's a few items that are listed. There's not a lot that have to do with separations and distances and some of the things that are required to separate items like the drive aisles from where people are seating or where food is being picked up. So there are a number of those kinds of performance standards, if you will, that are outlined in here. I think with the conditional use process, the way the application is guided to work, they'll provide us a site plan with that application, and it's just like any other development application we get. We try to encourage these folks from the minute they call us, before they're even making the application, if they have a site plan and a rough business plan, even a set of business bullet points, we'll do an assessment before they ever apply, and we'll sit down with them and work on it to sit there and say, okay, here's where we think you might have a hang up in this situation. Here's how we do this. And I think the more we learn from what people are doing, the more we can build some of those things into the conditional use permit. I think what it'll lead to is not necessarily code changes, but maybe standard conditions that will start applying to almost every permit that'll come through the process. And once that happens, then people will know that, because we'll have a record. We'll be able to go to them and say, yeah, the last 3 that came in here, this was a sensitivity. Here's what they did as a condition. Can you live with that or not? So we'll work through that with them. What I like about conditional use permits is it gives us flexibility to consider the site and the location and its context. And even though we have some standards, we may find that because of that context, we want to modify them in those locations. And I think this gives us that kind of flexibility versus just having a set of performance standards and saying yes, no, no, oh, too bad, you got knocked out.
Sir, I'm sorry, I have another question. Can I ask, please?
Please come forward. You don't have to state your name again.
Okay, thank you, sir. I wasn't gonna bring this up, but I went to a truck. I had money, which is green, and I had credit card, which is plastic. And all I was doing is trying to buy food. The driver told me, well, the owner, the driver, the worker, whatever you wanna call him, he told me, just like a restaurant, I have a right to refuse you service. I said, really? Based on what? I have money, I have credit cards. I don't cater to your kind. What is my kind? I said, sir, thank you. I don't want your food. When we're doing this conditional use permits, I pay taxes in the city of Gardner. And for us to let somebody come here and do business and talk to me like I'm trailer park trash, I turned and walked away. And it took all the mustard I could function in my body to just walk away and not speak what was on my mind, but it wasn't worth it. I know some of y'all don't go through this. I understand that precisely. But people do. And when you're sitting here making these decisions, don't always think about the majority. Can you please sometimes consider the minority? They're making money on my tax dollars. And it was upsetting to me. It was frustrating. And I'm glad to be in this meeting this evening because I had no idea this was on the agenda. But I'm glad to be here because voices need to be heard and changes need to be made. This is a rainbow society. If you don't want my money, don't come to my channel.
I'll just say 2 things. Usually in situations like that, those are civil matters. We don't necessarily enter to that. The other thing that I will say though is if we are, the nice thing about the conditional use permit process is if we're receiving complaints about it, there is the potential that we could call that permit into question and go through a revocation process. So there are things like that that can happen. I don't know exactly how we would handle these cases. I'd probably be working a little bit with the police department on those kinds of complaints. Typically, these are civil matters though that are dealt with.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, I did have a few questions kind of late in the day, and thank you, Jim and Dave, for getting back to me. And you also addressed them in the meeting, so I appreciate that, so thank you very much.
If they have a truly temporary, mobile food truck, they come in for a couple hours and leave, not a lot's gonna change with it.
No.
This is more just
Yeah.
the ones that are a little bit more permanent.
So, yes, correct. So, and I know we're trying maybe to avoid certain names and things like that, but I'll use the Smoke and Soul one, for instance. It's a very self-contained unit. They pop up at different locations. They operate in that same kind of manner. Basically, they're gonna get their annual temporary use permit. They'll go through that process. The one thing that is a little bit different from them, and it's already in our code, but I'd say has been enforced a little laxly, is that that temporary use permit is really intended for a specific site under certain hours with that vendor. And there's been times that the vendor has used the temporary use permit. I'm not saying Smoke and Soul has done that, but where they've used it to actually go to multiple sites. And so we have to be careful because we're trying to monitor when it's an individual user, you're not supposed to have more than one of those on any site at one time. When you get to two, that's when you have the mobile food grouping side of this thing. And so if you'll notice, there have been times that we've had more than one on a site. And part of it, this year we were lax with because we knew we were going through this amendment process and we were trying to figure out, okay, we see the problem now, how do we define it and how do we address it moving forward? So people will know about that up front.
Okay, do we have a motion for committee recommendation number 1?
So moved.
Second.
Motion Deaton, second Baldwin. We adopt ordinance number 2757, an ordinance amending sections 17.05.030, 17.05.050P, and 17.05.050Y8 of the Gardner Municipal Code relating to food and beverage mobile uses. City Clerk.
Councilmember Shute,
Yes.
Councilmember Baldwin,
Yes.
Councilmember Ween,
Yes.
Councilmember Deaton,
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts.
Yes.
Ordinance number 2757 passes. No old business. Moving on to new business. Consider early approval for executing a 2023 agreement with AFCO LLC for the design and installation of a new playground for Veterans Park. Matt.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council.
It's in my notes. It says Matt Wolf. But we'll let you go, Jason.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So over the past few months, city staff and community stakeholders have been working on a design for the Veterans Park Inclusive Playground Project with AFCO LLC. Earlier this month, members from our steering committee approved a final design for the project that we're excited to share with you tonight. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Matt Klein, who's our design consultant with AFCO, to present the project to you, and then following public comment, if you guys have any questions, that we'd be more than happy to answer. Matt?
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. There you go. All right. Well, council, thanks for having me. Jason, thanks for inviting me. I won't take too much of your time, but I've been involved with Jason and the Playground Steering Committee for the last several weeks, and just wanted to kind of run through the final design. This view here, we're essentially looking south. So this walkway here, if you look to the left toward the east, we'll keep that area split with the zip cruise here. That's a double zip cruise, and then side by side it is a zip cruise assisted. So that has a seat with a lockable harness in it. So children that need back support, have weak core strength, need that harness, they can also be included and feel safe and have fun in that. As far as swings, we've got a design for multiple users, different ability levels, starting with the friendship swing, and then we've got some classic belt seats, molded seats with harnesses for 5 to 12 and ages 2 to 5, and then some infant and toddler seats. And then moving over to the main playground area on the west side, we've got an entrance here with 16-inch ramp elevation, and then we can move a child in a wheelchair through that entire structure up to a 48-inch elevation, and then back down a ramp on the other side. So with that, we've got multiple points of entry and exit within that, which is feedback from the steering committee, and with on the back side here, I guess this would be kind of the southwest corner where we've got the shade and the seating. We've got access to that larger ramp structure back there. We've got lots of inclusive playground components like the We Go Round. That's a wheelchair inclusive. It's got bench seats for children and parents, caregivers, and then you can fit a user in a wheelchair onto that structure without having to transfer out. Another close-up view there. Lots of shade, lots of seating. Can never have too much of that. I've been doing this a little over 11 years, and that's one of the comments we always get when we're always done is I wish we had more shade and more seating. Right here, this fence opening, this will be a gate at this. The rendering just didn't have it. But as you enter here, you're met with the Cozy Dome, which is a nice little sensory piece. It's a climber. Kids can climb in it, kind of have a little time to themselves. This little orange structure here is Market Cafe, and it is for ages 2 to 5. It's got a lot of built-in kind of words, find fruit, find vegetables, lots of questions. So it's kind of sneaky educational for parents to chat with their kids while they're on the playground. A little higher angle here. Go back a little bit. So with the ramp structure, we didn't want to just stop at the ramp. We also wanted to provide some climbing for a wide variety of users and not have it be something where it had a design geared toward a certain user. But for instance, we did a recent playground that I went to, and there was a mother with a little girl that had special needs, and then she had a 5-year-old son who was fully able, and he was off playing, but there was plenty to do for this mother and her daughter, and that's what we wanted to achieve here, where we've got a little something for everybody and truly make it as inclusive as we can. And then the overhead 2D here just kind of shows a little footprint of how that impacts the existing site. And then the last piece is just a little 3D fly-through here. And with that, I'll take any questions or comments.
Thank you, man. We'll first open it up to public comments. Is there any public comments on new business item number 1?
I'm on the steering committee. I have a comment. Do I need to come to the mic?
Please come forward.
Okay, sure. What is the age appropriateness for this order?
Ages 2 to 5, 5 to 12.
Okay, and another question I have is, right now, a lot of children have what is called companion pets. Have you thought about that? Or are they going to be completely left out of this part? Have you thought about what if somebody was to bring a pet to this part?
2, 4, 6 6-foot benches with shade over each one.
6 feet, so 6 foot. Okay, and shade for each one, but no, like, individual seating, it will be all bench seating.
Right, they're permanently fixed. They'll be in concrete footers.
Okay.
There's also a shelter at this park as well, with picnic tables.
Yeah, which you can't, there's an existing shelter kind of right in this area that's large with picnic tables. So, you know, if this is full, this is be kind of meant for overflow.
Okay, did we see that part? 'Cause-
No, because that's an existing structure.
Okay.
I'm only rendering for the new thing.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you very much for your time.
Any other public comment? Thank you for your help on this, Jennifer.
My pleasure.
Council, questions, comments?
So I like that last time I saw this, basically nothing changed other than minor tweak, and so that's good. It means the design was meeting criteria that people liked. Was there any feedback as to whether or not there was enough for a 2 to 5-year-old versus the 5 to 12? I know the 5 to 12 is more active, doing more, you know, getting away further from mom and dad, but was there any comments about that from the steering committee?
No, there wasn't.
Okay.
I had a question kind of in the same lines of that. Did we get any feedback from the committee? Is there enough resources that we're providing for special needs? Like, I mean, because it seemed like there were some options, but I don't know, I guess I thought maybe there'd be more. But I don't know if there was a discussion about that or not, if anybody else has a feeling on that.
Well, there's definitely more.
Right.
But for this one park and that footprint and our budget,
Limited
this
space.
is kind of what we have. Now, obviously, we have more parks coming, so, you know, we'll.
And there's so many levels of inclusivity.
I
I thought for, you know, this project, being veterans, high visibility, high usage, I thought AFCO and their design team did a real good job at trying to put together several different inclusive components in this initial project.
And I know it's a balancing act, and I
Sure.
know that there's a lot of factors. I just wanted to make sure. I just was curious about that.
And we're replacing the mulch that's there now with the artificial turf.
Correct.
What is the maintenance on that turf? And I hate that I even have to say it, but I see it every summer on CFG, vandalism, spray paint, you know, things like that, cleaning it up.
Do you want to touch on the turf maintenance?
Yeah, so turf maintenance is essentially very little to no maintenance. I mean, it's kind of a different animal than like football field turf, but over time, you'll see high wear areas wear down. What we're doing on the front end is going in what we call trample zones, like at the end of slide exits, that's like a putting green
Yeah.
material. So it's really high wear. You could take a turf groomer across it. Cities never do that, but essentially it's very low. With the playground equipment, if you do have tagging or anything like that, we provide like a maintenance kit that has feeder remover, like instructions on what to do if this happens on this material. Doesn't really happen often, but
And we are in the process, I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, we do have vandalism in our parks. This one, I will say, is one of our least vandalized ones, just cause it's in such a high visibility area. But we are actually, working with IT and kind of redoing our camera system, trying to make it uniform. And not to give away our secrets, but I mean, if we're investing this kind of money, then we need to be able to kind of watch over these kinds of things, so.
Well, and that was my question, you know, if we're gonna spend this much money on a park, I want it to stay
Absolutely.
nice for a long
Mhm.
time, and unfortunately, things don't always work out that way, but,
Right.
anything we can do to prevent that would be fantastic.
I was gonna ask about the gating and whether those gates will be locked after hours, or are they, you know, is that going to be a possibility?
They will not. We have several gates in a lot of our parks. Curfew's at 11. We just don't have the manpower to
Sure.
monitor that.
Okay.
So, but again, you know, with this being in a high visibility area, you know, hopefully that will help.
Mhm.
So,
Okay,
That main entry gate will probably be default closed anyway, right? The parents have to open to let somebody in, yeah, so, with like a spring assembly, auto closes?
yes.
Yeah.
the only other thing I had that I wanted to make a comment comment about is I'm glad to see that a lot of sensory components are involved in this. This reminds me a lot of the park over by Olathe Lake, which has the same kind of zip line deal. I'm talking about I think it's called the Beaver Shelter, Beaver, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's on the northeast side of Olathe Lake. They've got these same kind of inclusivity components. And then also, obviously, the sensory items that are over by that, by the area where all the, by the beach, basically, like they've got a big old sensory area. It looks like we've included a lot of that kind of functionality in a and this is a relatively small footprint. We all understand that, but this is a good start, and it's a good model by which we can use to perhaps duplicate in other larger areas like Celebration. I think that would be. Obviously, that's a very expensive get right there, but I like the fact you're using the artificial turf. I'm assuming there's sponging or some sort of absorbent material on the bottom, so it'll basically be very giving. I'm very happy with this. Very happy with this this concept, and obviously the steering committee had some very good feedback. And thank you for all this work.
Jason, what's the timeline then after approval?
That's the crystal ball.
Yeah.
So lead time right now, we're out about 20, 22 weeks just on the equipment. Everything's made in the U.S., so it's coming out of Delano, Minnesota, but they are at capacity. So we're kind of shooting for the early to mid-August completion as of today.
Completion, like, cause this thing says that the construction would start in the spring of 2023, so it'll take pretty much all summer to get everything installed, and that's if everything comes in on time.
Yeah, it will. So once we place an order, the nice thing is we know how far we are, and it's reliable. So once we place an order, we get an order confirmation, we get a ship date. That date doesn't change.
Okay.
So, but we've got a pretty stacked summer too. So like I told Jason, I don't want to promise you a date because I've been doing this long enough that I don't want to have egg on his face and have a disappointed community. So I would rather err a little bit on the long side. Because we do have a lot of school playgrounds we're trying to get done. We have a 2.5 month window to get those done. So,
And we plan on, while these supplies are coming in, there may be a possibility of cost savings as well with demo, some grade work, things like that. So that way the site is prepped and ready to go when these supplies are in and we can start going with construction.
I think there's a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily mind waiting a few months if they know what's going to be coming in. So a nice communications campaign around the inclusive playground would be probably really good.
And so once we have a better idea on the equipment, we plan to put a page together to kind of follow the project and look for updates and things like that. So to keep everybody, informed on where we're at in the process.
Super.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Sir, I have one more question. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Come forward, please.
Jason, my question is for you. I'm sure I must have missed it. How many laboratory facilities do we have at this point? Special needs kids have special need problems. And I'm just wondering, are the laboratories fitted? You know what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Please.
So that's a great question. It's something that we actually, we saw on our bus tour. Was it Meadowbrook is the new one?
Yeah.
They have the oversized restroom facilities for adults, the adult changing tables, things like that. What we have here at this park, it's not fitted for that. It's an older model. This park was constructed in 2003. And so I actually had a meeting with our grant writer last week, and there's actually a grant that we're going to go out for in the spring to try to look for some funding for something like that, because those facilities they're not cheap. So, the focus with this, primarily was to get going with the playground, the inclusive part of that, and then kind of work around that to see how we can facilitate, other areas of that park.
Okay. Do we have a motion for new business item number 1?
So moved. Second.
Motion Baldwin, second Shoot. We authorize early approval for the city administrator to execute a 2023 agreement with Athco LLC for the design and installation of a new playground for Veterans Park in the amount of $597,609, plus a 10% contingency. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain? New business, item number 1 passes. All right, let's move to council. Start with Council Crowd.
Nothing this evening, Mayor.
City Clerk Sharon Rose.
Nothing tonight.
Finance Director Matt Wolf. Everyone else get on board? Deputy Administrator. City Attorney. Gons, Utilities.
Nothing tonight.
Jason.
I have a few. No, I'm kidding. I just have a couple. I did want to, thank the governing body and the members of the steering committee, for this project. It's long overdue. I thought we, completed this process so far pretty good, timely. We didn't rush it. I think it's going to be great for the community. For me, 20 years ago, next year will be when I was at the dedication of Veterans Park Playground with Mayor Lehman and Jeff Stewart. And so it's kind of cool 20 years later to see that park have a facelift. So, but I do appreciate, Jennifer and all the other members of the steering committee, the selection committee staff, that have been a part of this process and appreciated their input for it. So I wanted to recognize them.
Thanks for all the hard work. Mr. Dopick.
Just one item, Planning Commission is meeting tomorrow night. It's a little bit out of schedule. Usually we're the 4th Monday, but with the Christmas holiday coming up, we will have our Planning Commission meeting tomorrow night at 7 here in the chambers. We do have 3 items. One is Tall Grass 3rd phase is coming in. As part of that, Olathe RV has some site improvements that they're working on, and then out at Grata, it's a convenience store plan that we'll be looking at. So those are the 3 items on the agenda.
Kellen Headley, Public Works.
Nothing for tonight.
City Administrator.
As you know, Jay Belcher announced his retirement March 31st of next year. I do have a process in mind. We'll be advertising for that position after the first of the year. I don't intend to use an outside consultant to do the search. I think we have a number of candidates in this area that will be able to fill the position, some internally. So I'm going to put together a interview committee. I've already talked to the mayor, so that'll be moving forward. So I just want to let you know that we are moving forward, and we should be able to fill the position before Jay leaves.
All right, move to council. Councilmember Deaton.
Yeah. On that note, for Chief Belcher retiring, I wanted to see what everybody thought. The chief of police position is the only director level position that requires residency. We don't require it for any other director level. And I was wondering what people thought about either lifting that, because if we don't require it for any other directors, why that one? And I don't want to miss out on a candidate that is a couple miles outside of town. I was thinking maybe a radius requirement, so they're not, living out of state or something like that, but it's just, if they're all the same level, why does one director have to have a residency requirement where others don't?
Well, I think that part of that is driven by, as you said, emergency response. And so if like, for example, if they need to run an emergency operations center or something like that, I don't have a problem with like a 10-mile radius or something like that if they can get here within 15 minutes.
I'm just thinking, if we have
yeah.
an emergency where our chief of police is, like needed within 15 minutes, and we've got some serious problems, but that doesn't also, what if our chief is out to dinner on the plaza? I mean, it's not like the person
Well,
has
yeah.
always,
I
an
understand.
emergency can happen anytime. I just thought that, a residency requirement, maybe we should look at it just because it's one position in this town.
Yeah, I've got no issue with a radius requirement. Do you have anything in mind as?
I was thinking like 10, 15 miles.
Yeah.
So we just,
Yeah, so Olathe, Spring Hill, southwest.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a
From
necessary
the
issue.
center of town or the border of town?
And then the border always changes.
Yeah.
You know?
And the
Probably,
center
prob- maybe
changes.
from the
Yeah.
Justice Center, maybe from the Justice Center, I should say that.
From the Justice.
From the Justice
Yeah.
Center.
Yeah.
I think a radius is fine, good. I like the 10-mile radius, and I think from the Justice Center.
That puts us well
That-
outside our city limits.
It does, but that I think,
Today.
but I
Oh,
think
well,
that,
yeah.
I think that will give us an opportunity to have maybe different candidates that would have be limited, because they don't want to necessarily move to Gardner for whatever reason. I think we could lift it, but or adjust it maybe to a radius.
I don't have an issue with that. And I guess the only other thing is, and I don't know what, we wouldn't want to show preferential treatment, but if the right candidate were to come across
Right.
outside of that,
Right.
would we want to entertain?
Well, and that's my thinking. Like, housing is difficult to come across. If we find the right candidate who maybe just wants land and can't find what they want, are we going to miss out on a good person because of, you know, I don't know.
Well,
I
there's
think
not a
you
lot-
either separate this and it's something we talk about with
Yeah.
directors, and you could even bring in car allowance if you want to get into that. But it's either something that's just a necessity or it's not. Because if it's something that we say is stickler and it's important, then I don't think you even advertise outside that area, and we don't care who the greatest candidate is outside that area. They don't matter.
Well, they would have to relocate to that.
Right, they would have to relocate. Right.
Yeah.
So either they come or they don't, but we don't care if they're standing 1 mile outside and there's 10 of them that are amazing. Or we do. So we have to decide if it does matter or doesn't matter.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
because
it's,
I need that information to advertise for the position.
yeah.
City administrator, do you have any, I mean, you've been through that.
So,
Yeah.
right, and, you know, I think 10 miles is fine. I would, you know, anything within, you know, a 30-minute response time, I think is reasonable.
So maybe 15
do it,
miles, yeah.
You know, it's a little subjective, like I think Tori said, if we have a great candidate that's, you know, 15 miles away, are we really gonna pass on that person because of the 5 miles? I mean, our fire chief doesn't live in town, lives probably 10 miles away.
Yep.
So as long as, in today's day where the communication, you know, you have cell phones, you know, and 20 years ago we were on pagers, so it's not as big a deal.
Yeah, and also we were public safety at the time, and we had fire incorporated in that. So yeah, our chief at the time, when this was passed, was working fires too.
And I can,
So-
during the
Yeah.
initial interviews or reviews, I mean, I can let people know that our
Mhm.
expectation is that they're within 30 minutes of you know,
Yeah.
responding to the city.
Yeah.
Instead of just setting a, you know, a 10 mile or something.
I like that. I like the 30
Yeah,
miles.
because response
30
time is
30
actually
minutes.
more, a better indicator. So you're talking about like South Overland Park, which is within that 15-mile radius, is a lot different from being in Wellsville, for example, because you can get to hear from Wellsville faster than you get to hear from South Overland Park.
To clarify, when you say
So-
response time, you're talking drive time, not I
Right.
wake you up in
Yeah.
the middle of the night, you get changed, and here you
Oh,
are.
no,
It's drive time.
drive time. Yeah. So yeah, I can see that.
I like a little of the restrictions, but I also agree, we want to get the best person for the job, so.
We have a consensus in 30
I go
minutes?
with that.
30 minutes?
Yeah.
Go with 30 minutes.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anything further?
No.
No, you, yes.
Yeah.
Here's where we're at now.
Nothing further. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Casey.
Councilmember Ween.
Nothing for me tonight, thank you.
Councilmember Roberts.
I don't have anything, but Merry Christmas to everyone.
Council Vice President.
I'm not going to put on my Santa hat. I want to again commend the Parks and Rec committees, as well as the steering committee, part of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, for their work on getting that done with the inclusive playground. That's a big step forward. It's also a big investment and a big commitment. And just wanted to kind of, let them know that, we as a council are very much behind this project and would love to see this come in. Hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later, but we'll see how that goes. You know how it is with supply chains. But great work, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that come to fruition. As for our chief, Jay Belch is an institution. He's been here for a long time. I think there were pictures of him like way back when he was working fires back in, was it 96 or something like that? Is that right? 98? Yeah, right there. They're with you, exactly.
That was me in '96.
And he was a strapping guy too. Still is a strapping guy, but I mean, much less, much more hair and much younger looking. And he is a great asset to our community, a great asset to our first public safety, then also our police department. And man, those are big shoes to fill for anybody who gets chosen for that position. So just wanted to give my personal thanks and the thanks of the community to Jay Belcher, who has really given his heart and soul to this community in more ways than one. So we hope that he'll have a great retirement moving forward. That's all I had.
Council President Baldwin.
I just want to say that I'm the one that typically looks at the line item and says, can we do better? Can we cut that cost or whatever else? So when I came here 13 months ago and asked us to look at the inclusive park, I didn't anticipate a whole lot of pushback, and we didn't, but I think it's great to see that everybody has been so on board and welcoming of the idea, and that it shows how much it was needed. So I just want to say kudos to everybody involved. I really appreciate that. I think it's great for our community, and I think people will take notice of the first one and be looking forward to the second and third. So, and everybody have a Merry Christmas.
I just had actually one quick thing, Captain Crowd, on our codes complaints. Can they be done anonymously?
Yeah.
Yes, and most of them actually are. As I'm not sure if everybody's aware or not, we are without a codes enforcement officer currently. So I've kind of had a crash course in the last couple of weeks. And numerous people that I've talked to on dealing with issues all try to get you to tell them who the complainant was. And I know in my case, I've seen several of the paperwork and almost all of them are anonymous. And then we just skirt around the issue and try not to tell them. Most people come up with their own idea on who somebody is by their own opinion, whether it's right or not. So unfortunately, we also don't usually correct people. We just try to steer around it. If it really doesn't matter who complained, we still have the issue that we have to take care of.
So I met with Ms. Babon after the last council meeting. About a half hour into our meeting, I called Jay Belcher down, and we explained that information to her. We sat out front in the lobby. The only time where it would officially be, you'd be notified is if we have to subpoena somebody to come to court, then they would know who it is.
Have we ever done that?
Subpoenaed somebody?
Yeah,
On a complaint, you can, yeah.
Yeah, but I can't remember ever doing that.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. That's a pretty extraordinary move, actually.
Yeah, that's escalation.
So the civil action at that point. Yeah.
Well, other than that, I just want to say Merry Christmas to everyone. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion Deaton,